What if everything you thought you knew about Somali origins was completely wrong? For generations, Somali oral tradition told a clear story. Noble ancestors from Arabia, bloodlines connected to the Prophet's world, Arab traders crossing the Red Sea in the 11th century, bringing their heritage to African shores. It was a proud history, passed down through centuries, but then scientists looked at the DNA, and the story shattered. When researchers sequenced nearly 1 million genetic markers from Somali genomes, they expected to find traces of that Arabian migration from 1,000 years ago. Instead, they discovered something that shouldn't exist: a West Eurasian genetic signature that entered the Horn of Africa at least 23,000 years ago. 23,000 years. That's older than the pyramids of Egypt, older than the first cities of Sumer, older than humans ever planted wheat or drank milk as adults. This ancient signal, called the ethosomali component, doesn't match modern Arabs. It's not found in Persians. It doesn't align with North African Berbers. This genetic signature split from all other Eurasian populations before the Ice Age ended, and yet it makes up nearly 40% of Somali DNA today. The other 60%? Deep East African ancestry, rooted in the Horn for over 100,000 years. Here's the contradiction that stuns scientists. Somalis carry two of the world's most ancient genetic streams, African and non-African, blended together, yet they remain one of the most genetically uniform populations on the entire continent. And there's another shock waiting. Scientists searched for the Arabian lactase mutation, the gene that lets adults digest milk. It's common across the Arabian Peninsula, present for over 4,000 years. In Somali DNA, it's completely absent. So what happens when hard science dismantles the foundation of cultural memory? Who were these mysterious people who carried a 23,000-year-old signature across deserts and seas long before any written language, any organized religion, any kingdom rose to power? How did their blood become the very blueprint of Somali identity? Because if the answer isn't Arabia, then something else happened. Something ancient, something forgotten. And the truth buried in Somali genomes might rewrite everything we thought we knew about human migration itself. That forgotten world finally has a name, and it's hiding in plain sight. Scientists call it the ethosomali component, but it's far more than just a label. Hidden inside nearly 40% of Somali DNA is a Eurasian signature that doesn't belong to any living population on Earth. It doesn't trace back to Arabs or Persians or Berbers. It's not connected to any known empire, any ancient kingdom, any recorded civilization. This genetic signal broke away from other Eurasian lineages roughly 23,000 years ago, long before humans discovered farming. That timeline matters, because it pushes Somali non-African ancestry deeper than anyone imagined possible. This wasn't a migration during the rise of Islam. It wasn't even during the Bronze Age. This happened before the Neolithic period, before pottery existed, before the first grains of wheat were ever planted in soil. The people behind this signal were likely related to the Natufians, hunter-gatherers who lived in what's now Israel, Palestine, and southern Lebanon during the Epipaleolithic period. Archaeologists have found their burial sites near caves in the Levant. Skulls, stone tools, decorative beads. But until recently, nobody knew their genetic legacy reached across the sea into Africa. Genetic research, including groundbreaking work by Hodgson et al. In 2014, and Lazaridis et al. In 2016, shows this ethosomali ancestry likely arrived through the Sinai Peninsula, moving south into Africa between 12,000 and 23,000 years ago during the final phase of the last ice age. This wasn't a small trickle of people. It was a massive wave, a full migration of humans carrying unknown languages and unknown rituals, who merged with ancient East African hunter-gatherers and then vanished completely from history. But their genes stayed. And here's where it gets strange. This genetic component doesn't peak in Arabs or modern Levantine populations today. It peaks in Cushitic-speaking groups like the Somali, Oromo, Afar, and Beja. That means the Horn of Africa wasn't just a destination for ancient Eurasian DNA. It became its last stronghold. The oldest surviving Eurasian genetic signals in modern humans are found strongest in Somali populations. But this mysterious bloodline didn't arrive alone. Because after this ancient wave faded into the earth, another migration came. And this one was louder, larger, and carrying something that would change everything. Seeds. It wasn't rumor, and it wasn't myth. This was a continental reversal that nobody saw coming. Around 1200 BCE, a massive population wave surged out of the Near East, completely reversing the ancient out-of-Africa story. This time, it wasn't about survival. It was about civilization itself. These were Neolithic farmers, carrying everything their world had become. Domesticated grains, permanent villages, sophisticated herding strategies, and a completely reshaped genome. And they didn't arrive slowly. They came in force. Scientists call it the Eurasian backflow, and it's carved directly into the DNA of modern Somali populations. Studies show that up to 30% of Somali ancestry today comes from this single event, a profound genetic shift that lines up with one of the most dramatic transformations in African prehistory. What's staggering is how perfectly genes match archaeology. Near Eastern crops like wheat, barley, and lentils appear in East African soil right around this exact time. Excavations at Butana in Sudan, Enkapuni Yamuto in Kenya, and Mochena Borago in Ethiopia show clear transitions in farming tools and burial customs. These newcomers didn't just change how people ate. They transformed how people lived, how they buried their dead, how they organized power structures. And the genetic match is exact. These farmers carried ancestry from Levantine Neolithic populations, the same people who once settled Rakafet Cave in Israel and Katal Huyuk in Anatolia. They brought mitochondrial lineages like R0A and HV1 and Y DNA subclades that perfectly mirror ancient Levantine and Anatolian genomes sequenced in studies from 2014 to 2020. They also brought disease resistance genes, metabolic adaptations, and the genetic architecture needed for larger, more complex communities. This wasn't just gene flow, it was complete cultural fusion. But here's what makes this discovery so important. These farmers didn't overwrite everything they found, because beneath that fresh layer of agricultural DNA, scientists discovered something older, something stronger, something more deeply rooted. It wasn't from the Levant, it wasn't from Anatolia, it came from men and women whose bloodlines never left the African Horn. People who were already there, waiting. And they left a genetic signature that's still pulsing inside the Somali genome today. A legacy carved in absolute silence. That silence lives in the chromosomes, and the story it tells changes everything. Because beneath the grand migrations, the imported barley seeds, the Neolithic farming tools, there's a quieter story, one that doesn't come from ancient texts or oral traditions. It comes straight from the blood, and it starts with the Y chromosome. More than 70% of Somali men carry a genetic marker called EM78, specifically the subclade EV32. This isn't just any bloodline. EM78 originated in Northeast Africa roughly 19,000 years ago, and EV32, it's almost exclusive to the Horn. It arrived in this region at least 6,000 years ago, and it stayed. Not by accident, by design. These were the fathers of herders, the early pastoralists, who moved with cattle long before any foreign seeds arrived. Their descendants still remember this heritage through clan names, through oral histories, even through livestock traditions, all of it echoing a foundation that's completely indigenous. But while the paternal story is deeply East African, the maternal story speaks in a different accent entirely. Over 60% of Somali mitochondrial DNA, the maternal line, comes from sub-Saharan haplogroups like L0A1, L2A1, and L3F. But the other 39%? It's Eurasian. These lineages, M1, HV1, R0A, aren't recent imports. They trace back 20,000 to 30,000 years to ancient movements out of the Near East and into Africa. It's a gendered fingerprint that tells an incredible story. Ancient East African fathers, Eurasian mothers, a genetic blend that predates Islam, predates Christianity, predates even the first temples in Sumer. These weren't invaders conquering territory. They were co-survivors, mixing and moving and adapting together, forming the cultural spine of what would eventually be called Somali. And remarkably, the balance held, this male-female ancestry split is unlike anything seen in surrounding populations. It suggests something unique happened in the Horn. A fusion of two worlds that stabilized over thousands of years through endogamy, through tradition, through geography. But for decades, this entire story stayed hidden, unreachable, unprovable. The genetic evidence was fragmentary at best, and ancient African DNA was nearly impossible to recover. Until one skeleton changed everything. Because in a cave high in the Ethiopian mountains, buried beneath layers of rock and time, archaeologists found a man. He had never seen the ocean. He had never seen a plow. He lived in a world we can barely imagine. And yet inside his skull was the key to unraveling this entire mystery. His name was Mota. In 2011, in the cool highlands of the Gamo region in southwestern Ethiopia, archaeologists stumbled upon a cave, quiet, remote, seemingly empty. But inside, buried beneath layers of dust and volcanic sediment, they found him, Mota. Not a king, not a warrior, just a man. But what he carried inside his bones, no pharaoh ever could. In 2015, scientists extracted DNA from his petrous bone, the densest bone in the human body. Against all odds, the DNA was intact. For the first time in African history, a complete ancient genome had been successfully sequenced, published in Science. It changed everything researchers thought they knew. Mota had lived roughly 4,500 years ago, during a period before metalworking, before written scripts, before the Eurasian farmer wave had reshaped the Horn, and his DNA confirmed something radical. There was no trace of West Eurasian ancestry. None. Not even a shadow of the ethosomali component. Not one fragment of the Neolithic Levantine gene flow that modern Somalis carry today. His genome was entirely African, completely untouched by the backflow migrations that would arrive 500 to 1,000 years after his death. That means everything scientists found in Somali DNA, the Eurasian lineages, the farming genes, the cultural reshaping, all of it happened after Mota. His body became the control sample, the clean slate, the genetic before picture of the Horn of Africa. It's why today, any discussion of back migration, any claim about Levantine ancestry entering the Horn, is measured against him. And it wasn't just about ancestry. Mota's genome revealed no signs of lactose tolerance, no adaptation to Neolithic farming life, no Eurasian pharmacogenetic markers. He was genetically aligned with hunter-gatherers, resilient, rooted, and completely local. His very existence proved a rupture in time, a before and after moment in African genetic history. And yet, while Mota's DNA stopped there, frozen in that cave, Somali DNA did not. Because after Mota, that Eurasian backflow didn't just stop in the Horn of Africa. It rippled outward. It moved across vast distances. It flowed into places no Eurasian had ever set foot, carried by migrations, carried by memory, and carried by a people who became the genetic bridge of an entire continent. But here's the mystery that still haunts geneticists. Despite all this ancient mixing, despite millennia of gene flow from 3 continents, why are Somalis still so genetically similar to each other? To understand that, you have to go back in time. Back to an era when the Sahara Desert wasn't sand at all. 5,000 years ago, the heart of North Africa was green, and it held a secret nobody expected. Forests, rivers, lakes, large enough to sail across, an entire ecosystem that stretched from the Red Sea to the Atlantic Ocean. Scientists call it the African humid period. And it transformed the Sahara into a living highway for human movement. It didn't just allow animals to migrate. It moved people, entire cultures, and most importantly, DNA. Because long after Mota, and long after the Eurasian backflow reshaped the Horn, something astonishing happened. That new ancestry didn't stay locked in place. It moved westward, hidden inside a chain reaction nobody could have predicted. The Bantu expansion. Starting around 1000 BCE, waves of Bantu-speaking agriculturalists migrated out from the grasslands of Cameroon, sweeping through Central, Eastern, and Southern Africa in one of history's largest human migrations. But here's the twist that shocked researchers. These Bantu peoples weren't genetically isolated. They had already mixed with Horn-based populations who carried those ancient Eurasian signatures. And so, unknowingly, the Bantu carried those foreign genes into parts of Africa that had never seen a single Eurasian footstep. Today, when geneticists analyze the Yoruba of Nigeria or the Mbuti pygmies of the Congo rainforest, they find something that should be impossible: 6 to 7% Eurasian DNA. No direct contact, no archaeological evidence of Levantine migration into those forests. So where did it come from? The source? Back-migrated Eurasian genes from East African populations, genetically closest in structure to the Somali genome. This is backed by genomic modeling in studies like Pagani et al. 2015 and Busby et al. 2016. A genetic bridge was forged in the Horn and carried all the way to the equator. So even though Somalis never physically set foot in West Africa, their ancestral imprint did. It flowed silently, like water through cracked stone, through trade networks, through marriage, through language, and through the great reshuffling of African peoples. But here's the paradox that makes no sense. While Somali DNA helped reshape Africa's entire genetic map, the Somali population itself stayed remarkably unchanged, tightly clustered, genetically uniform, with no signs of recent mixing, almost completely preserved. That's the contradiction. How can a people so deeply involved in Africa's genetic evolution remain so internally uniform? To answer that question, scientists had to look beyond migration patterns and ancient bones. They had to examine the very structure of Somali society itself. The clan system. An oral framework, yes, but also something far more powerful, a genetic architecture. Modern genome-wide analyses revealed something rare, something almost unheard of in human genetics. When Somali DNA samples were run through admixture analysis and principal component analysis, researchers expected the usual genetic spread seen in other admixed African populations. The data pushed back. No scatter, no variation, just a tight, distinct cluster, genetically locked. Despite millennia of known gene flow from the Levant, from Arabia, from East Africa, Somali populations showed extraordinary uniformity. It wasn't what geneticists expected. It was an anomaly of discipline. The secret? Admixture happened early, then endogamy did the rest. For at least 2,000 years, Somali clans practiced controlled marriage, reinforcing bloodlines with precision, intermarriage within subclans, oral genealogies that remembered 30 fathers back. Identity wasn't flexible, it was enforced. And with it, the DNA was locked into place. Even today, you can trace this uniformity in the blood itself. Over 60% of Somalis have blood type O, and a staggering 88% are Rh positive, extremely high uniformity across different regions. The immune system itself, measured through HLA typing, mirrors this pattern, nearly identical allele frequencies across clan divisions, from the coast of Xyla to the interior of Gulkayo. Y chromosomal studies tell the same story. EM78, especially the EV32 sublineage, dominates Somali paternal lines. But in certain clans like Duranisa, researchers also find high levels of TM70 and J1 haplogroups, markers tied to ancient Levantine ancestry, preserved like genetic fossils within specific family lines. This is what happens when a population controls not just who enters, but who stays. It's not just history, it's deliberate design. But genetic stability has consequences. Because when immune systems are built on ancient blueprints, and those blueprints rarely change, they can struggle when faced with new diseases, new pathogens, new environmental pressures. And deep inside Somali genomes are vulnerabilities passed down with the same pride as lineage itself. Legacy always comes with a cost. But where did those immune signatures actually come from? To find out, researchers had to go back even further. Back to the first cattle, back to the first herders, back to the people who shaped the horn, not with cities or armies, but with livestock and survival. It turns out the same genes that once protected Somali ancestors from famine, from infection, from ancient diseases, may now be putting their descendants at serious risk. And the evidence is written in hospital records across 3 continents. In 2020, a rare autoimmune marker kept appearing again and again in Somali diabetic patients, and nobody could explain why. Scientists in Mogadishu and Helsinki cross-checked the data, and there it was, HLA-DRB 1*0301, present in over 93% of Somalis diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, a gene involved in immune system regulation, now tangled in a silent epidemic. But this was only the surface of something far deeper. Somali DNA also carries pharmacogenetic variants that directly affect how modern drugs behave in the body. Variants like UGT1A4*2, found in over 14% of tested Somali samples, can delay the metabolism of common seizure and anxiety medications. Another variant, CYP2C9*3, present at 8% prevalence, alters the body's sensitivity to blood thinners like warfarin, a drug used worldwide but especially dangerous in patients carrying this mutation. These aren't just side effects, they're genetic landmines. When Somali refugees and diaspora communities arrived in Minnesota, in Finland, in the UK, Western medicine wasn't ready. Clinical trials had never tested these ancient variants. Healthcare systems assumed uniform drug response across populations. But Somali DNA, forged by pastoralist life, shaped by centuries of endogamy and environmental adaptation, responded differently. In 2018, Finnish medical researchers reported unexplained drug toxicity in Somali patients. The dosages were standard. The results were not. Hospitalizations, adverse reactions, confusion among doctors who couldn't understand why the medications weren't working as predicted. The genome had spoken, and it wasn't using the language of Western pharmacology. But this story doesn't end with vulnerability, because what harms in one era may protect in another. The very immune traits causing metabolic problems today may have once shielded Somalis from East African pathogens, from climate-related plagues, or even from malaria variants that are still poorly understood by modern science. This isn't just a health issue. It's an evolutionary echo, an immune system shaped by ancient migration, locked in place by isolation, and now speaking across time. But what if these genetic signatures, these ancient variants, weren't all born in the Horn of Africa? What if Somali DNA holds whispers from a world far beyond the savannah, a world of ships, salt winds, and distant monsoon coasts? The first clue wasn't found in the Horn at all. It surfaced in the genome of a child in Yemen, and then again in a family in Mogadishu, a maternal lineage scientists couldn't explain. It didn't come from Africa, not from Arabia, not even from the Levant. It came from Southeast Asia. In 2019, a mitochondrial DNA study shocked researchers working with both Somali and Southern Arabian samples, and what they found shouldn't be possible. They discovered traces of Austronesian mtDNA, a genetic marker tied to populations from Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines. It was like finding Pacific Ocean whispers in the middle of the Horn of Africa. But how? The answer lies in the Indian Ocean, the world's oldest superhighway. For over 2,000 years, that ocean carried more than just trade goods. It carried women, sailors, entire families moving with monsoon winds, arriving not as conquering armies, but as natural currents of human migration. Some came by way of Madagascar, where Malayo-Polynesian-speaking peoples arrived as early as 500 CE, merging with African Bantu populations and leaving deep Austronesian genetic footprints. And some went further. Somali ports like Zayla, Berbera, and Mogadishu weren't isolated trading posts. They were cosmopolitan gateways. Before the 19th century, Indonesian and Malay sailors were documented crossing into East African waters, drawn by spice routes, ivory markets, and the Swahili coast's growing power. But these weren't just trading encounters. They were deeply human ones. The mtDNA shows it clearly. This ancestry passed only through mothers. That means women made the journey across the Indian Ocean. Women who gave birth in Somali homes. Women whose daughters, and their daughters' daughters, passed on genetic threads that now sleep quietly inside Somali mitochondrial maps. Austronesian ancestry, in Somali DNA, isn't dominant, but it's real. It's old. And it completely reshapes how we think about this region. Because now, the Somali maternal line, once thought to be African and West Asian alone, carries 3 continents inside its genetic code. But for every answer that science provides, one question still haunts this entire genetic odyssey. Who was the first to call this land home? To answer that, researchers needed to trace not just blood, but speech itself. Because language carries memory that even DNA can't touch. And Somali isn't a linguistic isolate. It's not a lone survivor of some forgotten tongue. It's part of Cushitic, a branch of the Afro-Asiatic language family, one of the oldest and most enduring linguistic trees on Earth, a family that also includes Arabic, Hebrew, Amharic, Hausa, and even the sacred whispers of priests buried in ancient Egyptian tombs. But where did it all begin? That question has split scholars for over a century, and the answer might be more complex than anyone imagined. Some linguists say the Levant, where Afro-Asiatic Semitic roots first appeared in written texts from Akkad and Ugarit around 2000 BCE. Others argue for Northeast Africa, where oral traditions stretch further back than writing ever could. The DNA offers a strange answer. Because the ethosomali component, uniquely strong among Cushitic speakers, shows deep ties to pre-pottery Levantine populations dating back 23,000 years, but it also shows long-term local evolution, a hybrid signal born from bidirectional flow between the Red Sea coast and the Rift Valley. Linguists now suspect that Proto-Afro-Asiatic emerged not in one place, but along a corridor of movement, where cattle, culture, and language flowed together like braided rivers, a frontier, not a fixed border. And while genes speak in statistical code, the rocks tell their own stories. In La Scale, Somaliland, red ochre cattle still stand frozen on cave walls, painted over 5,000 years ago, their horns curved like questions into time. In Dambaline, hunter-herders dance in scenes that echo with linguistic memory. The imagery matches what scholars call the pastoral Neolithic, a time of expansion when both herds and words moved with clear intention. But even as researchers trace roots through bones, through languages, through mitochondrial strands, something still escapes complete understanding. Because no matter how far back they look, through ancient scripts or genetic syntax, one final thread resists capture. It doesn't come from rock or blood or trade, it comes from rituals still alive today. From songs no outsider can fully translate. From traditions no archaeologist dares interrupt. And it's there, in those unbroken practices, that the final truth may still lie waiting. Because when written records vanish, when stones go silent, when genomes blur into statistical clouds, only one thing remains: memory. Carried not on scrolls but in the minds of elders, in poems passed from mother to daughter, whispered, not written, remembered, not archived. The Somali story was never meant to be a straight line. It's a mosaic, jagged, scorched, reshaped by droughts and cattle raids and migrations that left no maps. But somehow, across 23,000 years of genetic reshuffling, one thing endured: identity. Not imposed, not borrowed, but forged and preserved through nomadic cycles where children still memorize lineage back 30 generations.